Hello, in this presentation we will be taking a look at the home page of QuickBooks Pro 2018, concentrating on the employees section of the home page. If you've been following along with us, we will be continuing with the Get Great Guitars problem. If not, that's okay. We will be looking at the home page and looking at the employees section of the home page. If you have the backup file to this point, you can select the File tab and open the backup file. That'll take us to the same point. We also have the Open Windows tab open here. To get there, you go to the Views and Open Window list. We have the home page open in the Open Windows. That can be found in the Company tab and the home page. We have before looked at the home page and concentrated on the vendor section, the customer section, and now we're concentrating on the employees section. The employees section will concentrate in on the paying process of employees and the paying of the liabilities for employees. If you don't see these icons, you probably don't have the payroll portion set up within QuickBooks, and you'll have to set up the payroll in order to see these icons. There's at least 3 different types of payroll settings that could be used for QuickBooks, 3 paid payroll settings and 1 that is going to be a free setting. If you were to process payroll for any significant amount of employees, you'd want to use the paid versions typically, because they will help you with the withholdings, calculating the withholdings in terms of Social Security, Medicare, federal income tax, and then it often differs in terms of the state taxes. So often the more expensive plans might do more in terms of having different states and or multiple states, and it gets more complex because, of course, the states have different tax rates, whereas the federal tax rates are all the same, so we can process the federal tax rates across at least the United States. If we got different states in different countries, then that gets a little bit more difficult for the software to calculate. If you do use the free manual version, you will still see these icons and we can see this whole process. It's just that when you actually process the payroll, you would have to then calculate for each employee what the withholdings were, and that's doable, but it does get tedious after a few employees. In any case, we've got the employees section with these 3 icons. It's going to walk us through this process as we have seen in the vendor section and the customer section. It starts off with the time entry. This could be a useful feature in that we can use this kind of as a time clock, meaning we can assign our time per employee in this time clock and kind of track hours, whether they be billable hours or non-billable hours. And we can use that to then generate the paychecks when we process the payroll. It's possible to use this and or not use this within the payroll process, within the employee process. It's not required, in other words, for us to enter the time into this process in order to process the payroll. Some companies might enter the time. Other companies might be completely salary based, so they don't really have the time that they need to enter in order to process the payroll because they get paid a fixed amount each time. And other people might process that information outside of QuickBooks and then just use QuickBooks in order to enter the employee data. It just depends on how you would like to work that. Then we have the pay employees. When we are going to process the payment of the employees, this would be the icon we would use. And again, a lot of companies have different options for paying employees. They may use QuickBooks. You may be using something outside of QuickBooks. You may be using a third-party vendor, in which case you would have to get back to QuickBooks and enter the data into QuickBooks so that you have the information in terms of employee expenses and the employee liabilities for your data to make your financial statements correct. If we go into the Pay Employees section, you will see the items in terms of processing the paychecks. And if we were to click on any of these items, what we'll have here, we'll have the pay period, the period end, and then the check date. And then we'll have the check number, and then we'll have our list of employees. And if we take a look at the employees within the list, if we check them off and take a look at an employee within the list, we will see some of the detail here. So this is going to be a salaried employee. We'll have the salary, and then we'll have the withholdings from this particular employee, giving us the net check. Here we're using the free version, the manual version of QuickBooks Payroll Processing. And when we work this, it's actually really good for an example problem to use the manual version because the tediousness of actually calculating out the withholdings will show us what the software is doing, and then we'll be able to work that out. So we have here no withholdings at this time. We'll calculate that at a later time. This will be the net check then. Over here, we're going to have the employer withholdings, and this will be the amount that the employer has to withhold on the employee wages. We'll talk more about that as we go, but I'm closing this back out. Point being, once we process this, payroll will have everything set up, meaning it'll debit the payroll expense accounts or increase the expense account. It'll increase the liabilities. It'll track who we owe. It'll track that we owe the Fed money and the state money after we get that set up properly, which will mean that we're going to have to set up the employees, and we're going to have to set up some items in terms of items for the payroll items, such as when do we pay employees and the hourly rates and the salaries, and who do we pay in terms of payroll taxes. So once we get that set up, however, QuickBooks runs very well, and we'll take a look at that as we go. We're then going to see this icon here, which is the Pay Liabilities, and that, of course, is going to be the icon that will help us to track what we owe. When we pay the employees, we have employee taxes that accumulate upwards: Social Security, Medicare, state taxes, FUTA, federal unemployment tax. And then the Pay Liabilities is going to help us to track that information and pay off those liabilities in the correct time period. So when we select this icon, it's going to help us to basically write a check, decreasing the bank account, and then lower the liability, writing the check to the proper liability, and then track that information, recording the reduction in the proper liability. We will see much more of this, of course, when we set up the payroll items, when we set up the company, and when we look through the reports. We'll be jumping back and forth to these icons to see these icons. These will be the driving icons. When we select these items, these are the things that QuickBooks uses in order to generate the financial statements. Therefore, when we look at the financial statements and we drill back on them and try to see how they're created, how they're being made, we will end up going back to these icons, the processes within these icons.